Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Today marked the longest day of the year, the summer solstice, that occurred at 7:54 a.m. this morning, Alaska Daylight Time. And of course, that means the sun angle and the days, or the sun angle is the highest of the year, and the day length's obviously the longest. And of course, the equinoxes, March, September, that's where the, of course, sun angles in between the winter solstice and the summer solstice here. And day lengths across, the Earth are roughly about 12 hours in length. And of course, during the summer solstice, northern hemisphere or more northern locations have longer days than southern locations. In fact, the sun hasn't set Barrow and areas north of the Arctic Circle since last month. And anyway, the summer solstice is usually followed by the hottest part of the summer. Moving on to fire danger, high to very high here over the upper Yukon Valley. Temperatures well into the 80s, some cases approaching 90 degrees this afternoon, or by mid-afternoon. A couple of 90-degree readings showing up at Beaver and Chalk-Yitzhak up here, and a couple of extreme fire danger zones here, actually pretty high right across the northern interior here, south of the Brooks Range, or along and south of the Brooks Range, although we got some high fire danger here on the north side of the DeLong Mountains there, and a little bit there in the Kobuk Valley, or the Buckland Valley area there, and then kind of tapering off as you head on down into the northern Kuskokwim Valley, and then that persistent area high fire danger in the Copper River Basin there in the valley. And moving on to satellite imagery, still the drought going on there in southern southeast coast, extreme drought there for the southern panhandle. And looking at the satellite imagery, got some moisture off the coast here, storm system there south of the Gulf of Alaska, low center right about there, but that front really not much to it here, pretty narrow, and there is a narrow band of precipitation with that, and it kind of enhances as you come westward. Kodiak picked up half an inch of precipitation, rain the entire day, still falling at mid-afternoon today, Friday, and about 0.51 inches in the 12-hour period ending at 3 p.m. And that pattern is going to be soon to change here as this system pulls off to the east and you get into a much drier northwest flow, and should see a pretty sunny weekend coming up. Therefore, all of Kodiak, Alaska, and into the southern Cook Inlet area as well. Otherwise, the interior, just seeing the usual afternoon convection here building up in the clouds, with thunderstorms mostly starting initially up here over the Brooks Range and out over the North Slope today, and now starting to fire up here along the Alaska Range, eastern Tanana Valley, and even back to the west a little bit. So it's kind of a work in progress as things light up thunderstorm-wise. Otherwise, lots of clouds here over the Bering Sea on into Bristol Bay, linking up with the rain there over Kodiak, and some light amounts of precipitation, Port Heiden, and also over at Port Heiden and Cold Bay seeing a little bit of light rain today, with Port Heiden picking about 0.16 of an inch, and that's with Kodiak one of the two significant rainfall amounts around the state today, except if you happen to be right under one of those thunderstorms that are developing, especially up here the Brooks Range into the North Slope. Got kind of a weak disturbance back to the northwest of the Arctic coast. We can see just lots of cloudiness here over the Bering Sea, Aleutians, and then it gets a little whiter, higher top clouds here associated with the next storm. Southwest of Shimia, really no rain in there. Well, this rain, it hasn't actually started yet, but it will here before the day's over, and definitely into the evening, and that will be bringing gale force winds into the western Aleutians, gusts of 50 miles an hour tonight. Otherwise, really weak trough here. High pressure holding, continuing, not as impressive as it looked last week, but still ridging, and a lack of storminess here over the central eastern Bering Sea. And this low here in the Gulf, not particularly strong, and definitely the front not really strong. Just the rainfall in Kodiak could have clipped the southern Kenai Peninsula and maybe back into Kamishak Bay, with the low clouds, fog, drizzle occurring along the Alaska Peninsula. Trough here over the interior, thermal trough kicking off, beginning to fire up the convection. Now, actually thunderstorms currently going on along that trough axis there in the eastern Copper River Basin, and more so up here in the northern part of the state on out to the north slope with areas of fog over the Chuck CC, but nothing really showing up at any of the reporting stations, Shishmaref, Tin City, Wales, St. Lawrence Island, just cloudy skies. There was fog at St. Paul reported. Otherwise, partly mostly sunny skies here for the southeast coast, temperatures in the 60s to in some cases lower 70s, exception being Stewart, 77 degrees this afternoon, and temperatures rising to near 80 in some locations of the Copper River Basin. Otherwise, southern Alaska mostly in the 60s and 70s. And for tonight, looks like that front will spread a little bit of light rain into the central and south coast of the Panhandle. Otherwise, just look for increasing clouds elsewhere. Dry to the north, North Gulf Coast, dry and variably cloudy. Evening showers or evening showers, risk of a thunderstorm over the Talkeetna Mountains, maybe over the Copper River Basin, but everything winding down after it peaks this evening. But they may persist here, probably will persist along this trough axis in the northern Kuskokwim Valley on up towards areas near Tanana, and then showers extending along that trough all the way down into the Alaska Peninsula. Precipitation mostly in the form of fog, drizzle, really light, and then these showers, remnants of the thunderstorms, drifting out toward the Arctic coast, and they'll be dissipating as they go. So don't look for any big rainfall amounts with those wherever they hit. And then again, gale force winds, gusts 50 miles an hour for the western Aleutians, with rain spreading eastward to roughly Adak, and high pressure keeping the winds light and conditions dry here, except for maybe a little bit of drizzle and fog coming over the top of that ridge. Basically, look for some clearing as well. And then for forecast for first day of the weekend, Saturday, trough right through here again, mostly a thermal trough over the interior, sunny and warm, again quite warm to even hot, with temperatures back into the 80s over the upper Yukon Valley, eastern interior, westward out to possibly the Kobuk Valley and into the northern Kuskokwim. Could be some clearing up there on the Arctic coast in the afternoon. Otherwise, probably not so extensive on the thunderstorm activity up there as you saw today for the Brooks Range. Still a risk though. And a little farther south now into the northern Bristol Bay zone, could see some thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon. Much drier here, Kodiak Island. Look for becoming mostly sunny to sunny with light northwest breezes. As this weak system pulls off to the east, you can see the front just washed out to a trough now for showers from Dixon Entrance up to the North Gulf Coast. Moving ahead to Sunday, that low slowly edges eastward, kind of re-energizes a new front a little bit there, so look for some light rain and clouds over the southern southeast coast. Dry with isolated showers, maybe some clearing to the north. Mostly sunny Copper River Basin, Kenai Peninsula, and Cook Inlet, as well as the Susitna-Matanuska Valley. Thunderstorms again popping up over the interior, eastern central interior up to the Brooks Range. Otherwise, pretty nice weekend here for the western part of the state and the Bering Sea. This high really starting to narrow now as this system edges eastward, with rain pushing in toward Nikolsky in the afternoon, and lose the gale force winds though, definitely, and barely even small crafts, maybe small craft advisories just along and ahead of that front. For lows tonight, 55 to 60 or lower 60s here, eastern interior, and lower to mid 30s on the Arctic coast, with 40s and 50s southern Alaska, mostly in the 50s for the Panhandle. Followed by highs tomorrow here for the southeast coast, a little cooler with moisture coming in, 50s to mid 60s possibly, back into the 80s, anywhere in the 80s here for the eastern interior, mid 70s back to the west, and then lower 60s Kotzebue and mid 60s for Bethel, upper 30s to mid 40s for the Arctic coast, and well into the 70s for the south central Alaska areas. And for lows Sunday morning, 55 to 60 in the interior, 50 near for the Panhandle, lower to mid 30s in the Arctic coast, followed by highs cooler, a little cooler, looks like 75 to 82 for the eastern interior, near 40 on the central Arctic coast, 70s again, south central Alaska, and the northeast Bristol Bay and the southeast coast, 55 to 65.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic here, of course, a lot of marginal and IFR conditions out over the Bering Sea. And along much of the Aleutians as well, some breaks out there in the central and south central Bering. Otherwise, VFR here in the interior, areas of IFR Arctic coast, especially out in the west, on the western coast up there. And basically VFR from the North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, looks like some lower conditions, marginal VFR in along across just about all of the southeast coast with some IFR along the coast. And for the afternoon, marginal VFR, Dixon entrance right up to Lynn Canal Glacier Bay and maybe Skagway, eastern North Gulf Coast into looks like maybe southeastern Prince William Sound, otherwise VFR in the interior until you get north of the Brooks Range there. Some IFR, central western Arctic coast. IFR through the Bering Strait, right on down, covering much of the northern, western Bering and Aleutians. Then from OSA AKwx all the way up to the Alaska Peninsula, marginal VFR, and that extends in almost up to the southwest mountains across Bristol Bay. And for the Sunday morning outlook, staying VFR here in the interior, although an increase in the IFR now up along the eastern North Gulf Coast areas, marginal VFR in across all of Prince William Sound, south side of the Kenai Peninsula, and holding over the Panhandle. IFR pretty well entrenched along the Arctic coast and part of the North Slope. And for the afternoon, that retreats back, breaks up, and goes VFR out to the coastline there for the west side, and then marginal VFR right along the outer coastline on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Good VFR in the interior. IFR, marginal VFR, Bering Sea, some of that up to the coastline here. Through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, marginal, Chukchi Sea, marginal, and some IFR lingering around eastern North Gulf Coast and southward, and marginal VFR hanging in Prince William Sound, and some VFR breaking out over the Panhandle. Moving on to the passes, both Anaktuvik and Adigan tomorrow look pretty good VFR. Both passes area their entrance, and Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR as well. Risk of a thunderstorm possible in the afternoon, but for rainy, same forecast, risk of a thunderstorm, otherwise VFR. And for windy, VFR flying through that pass, Isabel, Mentesta, both wide open tomorrow. And for Tanita, VFR, possible thunderstorms in the afternoon to early evening hours, just a risk. And for Portage, starting out marginal with the lower cloud deck in the morning hours, becoming VFR, turning toward VFR conditions in the afternoon. And for Chilkoot and White, looks pretty marginal throughout the day tomorrow, with even possible IFR on the southern approaches of both passes. And from there, we'll take a look at the freezing levels. Not much of a gradient here, 8,000 feet over the Panhandle, and much of the interior, mostly over 8,000, 8 to 9,000, area of 10,000 foot freezing levels there, say just well over the east central interior areas. And then back down to about 6,000 there, kind of a system approaching the western Arctic coast, but not too chilly, 6,000 foot freezing levels. And then much more of a gradient out here associated with that next storm coming in, anywhere from 8 to 12,000 feet there, lines pretty close together. And icing associated with that next system coming in, I'd call it occasional light to isolated moderate rime icing above 10,000 feet though, here with the warm air mass edging eastward toward AKwx in the afternoon. None over the interior except whatever might be associated with a convection, and then above about 8,000 feet, again, light to isolated moderate rime icing for the southeast coast and areas. And for the jet stream, upper level ridging holding here over the north central interior, still kind of a northeast flow here coming down across southern Alaska into the low around the Gulf there. And then this trough kind of southward from the main low center off the western Arctic coast into the northern Bering there, a very weak system. Main jet to the south kind of bulging up there over the eastern Aleutians, but the bigger storm out here with this system over the Aleutians, we'll see at 9,000 feet. We've got winds coming up 40 to 50 knots ahead of that thing, with winds increasing to 25 knots there for the central Aleutians, really light under the ridging just to the east. This week's system, light winds 10 knots, maybe 15 to 20 there with that one off the Arctic coast. Light variable winds over the interior with high pressure, but northeast at about 15 over southern Alaska to Kodiak. 5 to 15 knot winds for the Panhandle. Same pattern, 3,000 feet, 5 to 10 knots for the southeast coast. Light for the Gulf of Alaska, light across all of interior Alaska. The windy area out there, that system, 20 increasing to 45 knots for the western Aleutians, and occasional light to isolated moderate chop from AKwx westward to Shemya. After the break, I'll be back with the marine forecast and sea ice conditions.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
And we love to hear about all the fascinating developments, new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros, back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread, the satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah. We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail. And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt.
Sure.
So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing.
Okay.
That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other. And they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
This sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo.
Oh,
so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there.
Right.
I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels.
Okay.
And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then.
Sure.
And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going
erupting.
off.
Yep.
Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths.
Okay.
But it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the spectrum there.
Okay.
So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really, and the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically, the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very interesting.
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the North Slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. It's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now you got to choose the right tool for the job.
Sure.
Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, like this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. And I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, you know, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellites, the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing, and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis, not much different from yesterday here, with kind of varying amounts of sea ice here along the main ice edge, and kind of a somewhat open area, but not completely open here from the western open area to this eastern zone that's a little bit farther to the north here, it appears, than yesterday, possibly. Otherwise, not a lot, no big changes in the forecast coming up for the next 5 days. Coastal water forecast here for the southeast coast. South winds 15 to as high as 20 knots on the south coast, and southeast 15 on the north coast, seas 6 to 8 feet, and south 20 for Lynn Canal, seas 4 feet. Light winds for Stevens Passage out of the south, just 10 knots, and a southeast breeze at 15 for Clarence Strait. Outlook for Sunday, no change here for Clarence Strait, still southeast 15, variable to north, or just variable winds, 10 knots or less for the central inside waters, seas at 2 feet. Lynn Canal, south 20 in the afternoon, seas 4 feet. We've got east to southeast light winds, 10 knots here on the south coast, but those seas still at 8 feet, keeping the small craft advisories in force. And east 15 on the north coast, swinging around to the west up there just south of Yakutat. And for Prince William Sound, light easterlies tomorrow at 10 knots. Otherwise, the North Gulf Coast, east-northeast, 10 to 15 knots. East or west 15 there for the Barren Islands, southwest 15, Kamishak Bay, and then they go south here until you get to the Forelands at 15 knots and the light southwest breeze in the afternoon for northern Cook Inlet. And for Sunday, southwest 10 for all of the inlets, seas at 2 feet, west 20, Kamishak Bay, west 20, Barren Islands, and west-southwest at 10 for the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, those seas 2 to 4 feet. And for Kodiak Island, west-northwest or southwest for Shelikof Strait there, both sides 15 knots, seas 3 to 6 feet. Small craft advisories, Bristol Bay, west winds 25 knots, so those seas up to 5 feet. Otherwise, westerlies here for the Alaska Peninsula at 15 to 20 knots, and actually 20-knot winds from Castle Cape to Sitkinak. For the Sunday outlook, Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest at 15, Bristol Bay. Westerlies at 20 knots, down a little bit from tomorrow, but from Castle Cape to Sitkinak. And up the east side of Kodiak Island, look for small craft advisories, 25-knot winds from the west-northwest and seas at about 5 feet. Shelikof Strait here west at 20. And for the Fox Islands, Unalaska Island, westerlies 10 to 15 knots, seas 3 to 4 feet. Unmak Island and across Nikolsky south at 15. Adak and Atka, winds coming up, hold the gales, looks like through tomorrow here out west. Small craft advisories, 30-knot winds, increasing to 30 knots tomorrow afternoon for especially Adak, maybe not so high for Atka, and then 35 to 40-knot winds on out to the west. And then those swing around to the northwest of 20 here, west of Kiska Island to Shimia. 25-knot winds continue from roughly Kiska to Adak, then kick it up to 30 knots, Adak and Atka specifically. From the south, southeast 25, edging in toward Nikolsky. Otherwise, on Alaska Island, south to southeast at 15, 4 to 6 foot sea. Southwest coast, west and southwest, 15 to 20 knots. Strongest south of Nunivak Island. Light southerlies for the Pribilofs, west 15 St. Matthew Island, light westerlies for St. Lawrence Island, and west at about 15 here for Norton Sound, but seas only at 1 foot. And for Sunday, north 15 St. Lawrence Island, west-northwest breeze here along the southwest coast, southeast 15 for the Pribilofs, south 15 for St. Matthew Island. And for the eastern Boulevard Sea coast, light northeast breeze at 10 tomorrow, seas 1 foot, north 15 with 1 foot seas for the central coast and the west side as well. 20 knots from Cape Beaufort out of the north and northeast all the way down to Wales. And the outlook for Sunday, northwest at 20, Wales up to Cape Thompson, and then north to northeast here for the western Arctic coast, only at 15 knots, and this light wind pattern, light northeast breeze at 10, continues to the central and eastern Arctic coast. And for tonight, some of that thunderstorm activity will be dissipating into showers and drifting out toward the Arctic coast there for some scattered showers, and otherwise dry to the south. Thunderstorms lingering much of the evening here, an overnight period actually, northern Kuskokwim Valley toward Denali, and dry south central Alaska. Chance of rain, and there's a south coast of the Panhandle with that weak front that dies across the area tomorrow for showers from Dixon Entrance northward. Again, sunny afternoon thunderstorms, temperatures eastern, central, eastern interior into the 80s once again. Nice everywhere else, and chance of rain southern Panhandle, dry to the north, and another sunny day with thunderstorms in the afternoon over interior Alaska, and that front edges its way eastward out west.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.